Hello, Father Rich coming to you from the hallway opposite of the front hallway of the second floor where my room and Father Mark's room is, and the some of the different images that I've shown you, and the 3D puzzles. So this is the back hallway, and this is an image or a picture, a painting of Archbishop John Mark Gannon, our most kind of well-known bishop in our history as a church. Remember, he was a bishop from the early 1900s till the mid 1900s, and really saw the expansion of our diocese in many ways. But we know that the university college named after him is probably one of the things we think of the most in his legacy. And it was there at Gannon that I was first learned about this topic that we're discussing today. So the next essay in our How the Church Has Changed the World is called Boethius in Prison. And that's where, actually, when I was a student at Prep, I took a class of philosophy of human nature at Gannon. And then later on, when I finished and after my undergraduate in marketing at Notre Dame, I eventually, when I was 24 years old, entered the seminary and had to do more philosophy. So I spent another year going to classes, mostly philosophy classes at Gannon, and then before going on to theology. So I'm going to actually rotate the camera. This is also the hallway where Father Shane Matthew, our resident, lives here as well. So his room is here, and there's a closet behind me, and this is the other stairwell of the rectory on the second floor. But this gives me a little more space to talk to you. So this is where I first got introduced to this book called The Consolation of Philosophy, Boethius, at Gannon, when I studied philosophy there. And part of the reason you always are required to study philosophy if in the seminary and preparing for priesthood before you study theology. And the idea there is that the philosophy really creates the foundation. It is the study of truth and the seeking of truth. And so we start from kind of a non-religious perspective of studying the history of humanity seeking that truth. And then we go into, okay, we understand in the revelation of Jesus as the fullness of truth, himself saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So then we study theology, the theology of God, as we in our Catholic faith. So philosophy is a huge piece of that. And so this consolation of philosophy, the essay is written about a man whose full name was Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. Okay? So he's mostly known in philosophical circles as Boethius, but he's also was eventually named a saint, and he's called Saint Severinus. So he lived in the 6th century, and he was one of the last classic Romans, as we say. The year was 524 when he was eventually, after serving the Goth emperor Theodoric. Remember, he was the Germans, the Goths, the barbarians had kind of taken over pretty much most of Rome, and the empire had shifted really its focus to Constantinople and to the east. But he was Roman trained, had an incredible background, not just in philosophy. He had a great respect for Plato and Aristotle. He wanted to combine them, but he also wrote on the Trinity, a great theologian. And some of the people one of the big people he would influence was St. Thomas Aquinas, who you might remember really uniquely united or brought the philosophies of the Greek ancient philosophers and their categories of Plato and Aristotle and applied them to our theology, and really remarkably. And so Boethius, Saint Severinus, had a huge influence on Saint Thomas Aquinas. But he was eventually, he was helping Theodoric kind of be his local kind of prelate, if you will, and leader in Rome because of his ties and his connections and the fact that he was so well respected. But eventually, there was uncovered a plot to assassinate Theodoric, and Boethius was considered part of it, and there was dispute as to whether he really was. So he was imprisoned and sentenced to death. But one last kind of act of compassion, I guess you could say, for Theodoric, he allowed Boethius to write while he was in prison awaiting his execution. And so he would take that time to write this book called The Consolation of Philosophy. It's considered a classic until this day. Other than the Bible, they say for the first 11 years, 100 years after it was written, so written in the 6th century until the 17th century, it was the second most popular book, written and read in history. So it's really remarkable to check it out, and I would recommend it. It kind of is a combination of poetry, philosophy, and theology, and kind of bringing together all of these things in a really remarkable way as this man is facing death. And one of the things he does is to challenge humanity, and certainly the church, to remember what Jesus called us to, which is not to focus on secular things. As he was reflecting on all the ways he had advanced in secular ways, and government leadership, as well as academia, and all these things that he had excelled in the end, here he was facing death, and he knew that Jesus Christ was the only answer to how he could make sense of all this and not become depressed and despair, but rather continue to hope. So if you feel real ambitious, I would encourage you to check out The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. But we certainly appreciate the way that he really helped advance our faith and philosophy, and kind of tying all these things together. Really a fundamental step in what we've talked about before, this combining of faith and reason and not seeing them as opposed to each other. And reinforcing how we approach truth as Catholics, that we start with philosophy and the search for truth. And we do see, even in the survey of great philosophers, the likes of saints, like Saint Severinus, Saints Thomas Aquinas, Saint Augustine, but then also seeing that once we establish that foundation of how we search for truth in our human history and how we're created for truth in our human existence, that theology really is the ultimate fulfillment of that search. So really fascinating. Hope you enjoyed this little exposure to the southern hallway of the second floor. Have a great day, and God bless.